Good day, Patrick Johnston. Welcome to the
Hello.
Canucks This Week video sponsored by Paragon Roofing, paragonroofingbc.com. I should just double
Actually
check
get
that
those
to make sure.
reads, get those reads right, Paul. Jeez.
Well, I'm waiting for the actual, Paragon are so busy, they haven't been able to get us the actual
Well,
script
that's
to
a
read.
good
So yeah,
sign.
it's paragonroofingbc.ca. You go there for all your residential, commercial, replacement, installation, repairs. Like if you wanted to roof it where mom keeps the peanut butter. Hat tip to Don Taylor going in the BC Sports Hall of Fame. No, we appreciate Paragon and everything they do for us. To bring you this wonderful video, and you're actually at the rink because the Canucks are back in town.
Yeah, almost 2 weeks away, and had a spirited practice, as we always like to say. I think most
Spirited,
practices.
yes.
I always generally are hardworking, spirited. I never know. They skate hard.
What
They do
what
their
would
stuff.
what would the opposite of spirited be if you in reporter speak? Flaccid,
Lackadaisical, slow moving,
lethargic.
lethargic, unspirited.
I feel like a flaccid practice would be a pretty
Last, yeah,
yeah. That's
yeah,
that would be one way to describe it. Um, so I last week we revisited the fact that even though the team was 2-2 at the time we did this,
right.
Canuck fans seemed riddled with angst. Now, since then, and my qualifier for this is I do like how Canuck fans seem to be basing their emotional roller coaster more off performance than results, which I think over the long term is not only is it the right way to go, it also shows that this is a pretty educated fan base. But it was funny to me this week to see that the biggest form of grievance was a ranking of one of the star players.
Yeah.
So let's just start basic. What has your assessment been of what you've seen out of this team now that we've got a little bigger sample size to judge them on?
Well, progress, and that was something that I asked Rick Tocchet about today, and I had it in my mind. Obviously, I think I talked about it's something I touched on last week. Obviously, only having played 3 or 4 games to that point, getting shots from the best areas from the slot, getting inside was a talking point from the observational standpoint, but it was something Rick Tocchet himself had talked about and had acknowledged. And you can see not so much that they are doing that better, but that everything else is coming together well. And I asked him, I said, you guys have obviously scored some goals as the time we're recording this, 9th most in the league. But I said, is the process still at where you want it to be? And he highlighted the fact that he felt that they've been moving the puck up the ice better. They've been controlling their own end better. There's just been a lot of things happening to build up to that. He still wants to see them drive the net more, but he's not wrong. You go and look from that game in Edmonton when they had, according to Natural Stat Trick, gave up 30 scoring chances, basically where the shot come from, which, not every scoring chance, not every shot is made equal because it all depends on how the puck got there in the first place. But as sort of a number that you want to see, you'd like to see that number go down. And every game since that game in Edmonton, that number has decreased to the point where they're down below 20. I think it was 18 against Nashville on Tuesday, which is a good, nice, solid number. And the Canucks had half as many chances going the other way. So, for a team that, like I said, they needed to show some development, needed to show some progress. They've done that, and I would say that is a thing to key on. Now the question is, they come home. They have 3 home games here. They've got, we'll be start hitting 10 games. We can start talking about whether that is really the true reflection of the team. If that progress continues, that's a really good sign. Even if it sort of stays around what it is right now, which is at worst sort of a 50-50 game. That has gone well. The early tentative signs are good from what we've seen so far.
So when you look at the Canucks and the fact that they had the one home game, which is still sort of a unicorn, the 8-1 over the Oilers, and then they go on this long road trip. As you mentioned, they're 9th in the NHL in goals scored, but they're also 6th best in goals against. So which is the bigger surprise to you?
I think it's the goals against. That was the big question, and could they actually do it? And like I said, there's been progress in that area. They still have work to do. They're leaning very heavily on Quinn Hughes and Phil Hronek. Both are playing over 25 minutes a night, partly because they're a partnership, and they're their top 2 defensemen. That's a lot to ask over an 80 82-game season. The goalies were, I don't think, ever going to be a question mark. Like Thatcher Demko played so well in the second half, and that's who he's been basically since he came into the NHL. He's been this dependable, reliable, elite starter. Casey DeSmith has been a fine, nice backup story. He's has enough sort of experience in the NHL that you would think he would be that capable backup, and he's been that. But what's happened in front of them, again, like I said, even in Edmonton, they actually gave up more scoring chances again. Or sorry, that opening night game where they won 8-1, they actually gave up more scoring chances than they did last Tuesday in Nashville. Everything went in. They didn't actually generate a ton, but everything went in that game, which is a story as much as anything about the Edmonton Oilers and their struggles in goal as anything. But the Canucks started on a bright note, but you're like, I hope that's not a mirage. I hope this is going to carry forward. Five games after that, we're sort of saying, okay, this is a team that does, structure, staples and structure is a word that Rick Tocchet loves to use, but we're starting to see that emerge. They still need more. They need more from their bottom two lines. They need them to be effective at both ends of the ice. And as Rick Tocchet himself, he needs to see his defense being more participants in the offensive zone, being active, creating stuff, helping produce stuff. But in terms of the overall play, it's a defense-driven story. That to me, more than anything, the goal scoring was never going to be a problem with this team. We saw that last year. We weren't going to see Andrei Kuzmenko score at the rate he did last year. That was never going to happen. But you knew that Elias Pettersson was going to be similar to what it was last year. We know JT Miller has been an excellent scorer since he showed up in Vancouver. The question for him has been on defense. And you know what? You look at his line, him and Brock Besser and Phil DiGiuseppe. They're not only are they, are Miller and Besser 2-3 on Canucks scoring, but they've been a really effective two-way line. Like they've done their job in their defensive zone. They don't have to be spectacular, but they have to do the job. They have to be reliable and dependable, and they've been that. And so, yeah, that's all part of that overall story, that overall this team is trending in the right direction. They still have to keep doing it, of course.
What does it say to you about the coach and his sort of tutelage versus, if we compare him to his two predecessors who,
Right.
things were so inconsistent with them and they couldn't find that formula per se, that you mentioned a guy like Phil DiGiuseppe, that's never a name that was going to get Canuck fans excited when he joins the team, but he fits with Tocchet, and he fits how he wants him to play. You talk about staples and structure. Has that been, I know we're only a handful of games in the season, but in comparison to the last two seasons, is this what you're seeing? Is whether you want to say it's buy-in, whether you want to say it's roster construction, that this team seems to be more on the same page than we've seen in recent memory, to be honest with you?
I found myself looking closely at a quote that Ben Kuzma got from Rick Tocchet talking about Craig Berube. He wrote a great profile of Tocchet before the season. We've got Berube and his Blues coming in at the beginning, or coming in tomorrow night. And there was a thing that Tocchet said that he learned from his friend, who was his old roommate when they played together in the Flyers. He said, he did a hell of a job making every one of them feel important. That's what I learned from him, how important the top guys in the fourth line are. And I think that's sort of Tocchet. Tocchet, clearly, he's a guy that cares. He's a really interesting person. The more we're getting to know him, and it's not just wanting to talk hockey, but he does seem to have a sense, a really sort of in the middle sense. He's a very self-aware person. I think he's very conscious of what works for players, what works for coaches, what worked for him, what doesn't work, and what his feeling of how his players need to feel, not just that they feel good, but that what drives feeling good. Travis Green both Travis Green and Bruce Bruder were both very player-centered coaches, and they had an instinct for wanting to know what's going on. But so far from what we've seen with Tocchet is that he's able to kind of make that a coherent, holistic sense of self, sense of purpose. And that quote to me spoke so well, that he recognizes that every one of his players plays a role, and that's a modern leadership talking point. That it's, the old days, obviously we talked about the captain, rah-rah, and sort of the Mark Messier mentality. And then that evolved into, the leadership group, as we like to say, say about 20 years ago. Where
Good in the room, Patrick.
Right. But now, it was something that first kind of put to me, and I'm going to talk about the other sport I love to watch, but Ben Ryan, who's the gold medal winning coach of the Fiji Rugby Sevens team at the Rio Olympics, and he's been a fascinating person anytime Rugby Sevens has come on tour, because he generally is brought along as an observer, and so we've got to know each other a little bit over the years. And one of the things he said to me is that he doesn't like the idea of the leadership group. He likes the idea that every player on the team understands they have a role, that their role is a leadership role, whether they're the guy that's the bottom of the roster who doesn't play a lot, or they're a star. I mean, the star's role is obvious. He has to lead the way. He has to make the impact. He has to get it done and lead his team into the fight, whether he says that or he does that physically. We can see that with Quinn Hughes. We can see that with Elias Pettersson. We can see that with JT Miller, for the most part. But what that also means is that guys at the bottom of the roster, Niels Höglander, right? Guys like that, Dakota Joshua, can understand that what they bring to the table is part of the shape of the team, that what they do is important, that what matters, and there's value. And it's not just that rah, but that everyone has a time and respect for their contribution to the team. To do. And so far, Tocchet seems to have that edge. It's hard to sort of put your finger on what exactly it is, but he seems to be finding that. And I think it comes back to that quote that he really lives that. He really believes in it. He's really intent on showing players how to get there. And then the other item to this, I was thinking a lot about, Vasily Podkolzin obviously had that terrible head injury on Wednesday, seems to be doing okay. Talked to Ryan Johnson today. He was at the rink, and I had a quick chat with him, and he said, yeah, I know, obviously he has a concussion, but like all things considered, it seems like things are going to, they're optimistic about his recovery. But we got talking about Podkolzin in the wake of the story I wrote before he got hurt, which was identifying, that a player can't just flip a switch on any given shift. I'm going to be this guy this shift. It's about learning how to be that player, the best player you can be in every moment, and setting that as your standard. And it's a hard thing to learn, as because a guy like Podkolzin, for a lot of reasons, but here's a guy who came up. Every player comes up, they're the best guy on their team, right? And then the closer you get to the top, the less and less likely you are going to be that guy. You have to start finding these other intermediate roles. In Podkolzin's case, he's such a great example of a player that is still finding his way in what Tocchet's looking for, but he's saying, listen, you come and you give it every shift. And it's not that you have to go to the max, you have to give 120%, whatever. It's just that we know that you understand the standard you can bring in the context of what your role on the team is. And he really seems to be dialing in on that and saying, listen, guys, I know you're capable of this, or I've seen that you're capable of this. I know that you're capable of this. And we can bring that out. And here are the tricks that we're going to set you up to succeed in that. And, maybe in the end, it's all talk and it won't matter. And I said this before, like, I really like listening to them talk, but I want to see them do it. And, again, the early signs are very positive in that regard.
Boy, we don't really have enough time to get into some of this stuff. I find it fascinating. All these things that you brought up, mostly because you're right, it is modern, but it harkens back to, obviously I'm much older than most people following the team these days, but there never used to be a first line, second line, third line. When you talk about the Habs or, the Oilers, right. I mean, yeah, you knew the superstars, but it almost seems in the NHL hit this period where you had your top line, you had your second line, you had your top pair, and third and fourth liners, bottom six, whatever you call it. Like, it didn't matter. Like, you just find guys on the waiver wire, and that's so not true as to what you're talking about. And when you bring rugby into it, there's so many examples in other successful sports. Obviously, New England Patriots are in a different era now. But when you hear everything, anyone who played for those teams under Bill Belichick, that was the number one tenet, was do your job. Whether you were the holder on the extra point and the game came down to 1 point, or you were Tom Brady and the quarterback, it was like, know what you're supposed to do and fulfill that role. And you have an importance to the team, and that's why you're on the team. I also look at, if you want to mix sport metaphors a little bit, in the English Premier League, you've got Manchester Derby this year or this weekend. And you look at the fact there's one team that spent more money than Manchester City in the last 10 years, and that's Manchester United. And they are miles apart in terms of their fortunes. And that's because you can't just go out and bring in star big names, which the Vancouver Canucks, frankly, have been guilty of in the past.
Yeah.
It's about building a team and having whether you want to call it grit or sandpaper or toughness or speed or skill or desire or, camaraderie around the team culture, whatever you want to call it. There's so much that goes into that championship recipe. Now, I'm not suggesting the Canucks are um, anywhere close to a championship at this point, but on a limited sample size, this seems the most promising team that we've seen, certainly since the early 2010s. What pieces do you think have made a difference to this squad so far this year? I mean, things could come apart quickly, but you're talking about this like guys knowing their role and they're fulfilling it, and you are starting to see that. What's been the change between this year and the last 2-3 years?
I think, I think some of it is the sort of solidity, if you will, of the top six. So whereas last year there was that kind of bump around, you had Bo Horvat in the mix. It is clearly Pettersson and Miller driving those two lines. And I would say Brock Besser, to sort of his recovery of form, if you will, he's looked so good. He looks quicker, he's involved. Like, that line has been so solid in two directions. I think that's made a difference. Pettersson's just bigger and stronger than ever. The Hockey Night Canada had a thing the other day where they said he's 176 pounds. I'm like, that's how much he weighed as a rookie. Like, we're 6 years on, guys. Like, I don't think he's 200 pounds, but I think he's closer to, 185. Like, he's just a big, strong guy. That's an element. Quinn Hughes obviously taking his game to a whole nother level, recognizing that he wants to be that guy. He's that point guard driving the lane, looking to dish, looking to score. Like, he is just controlling stuff. That's made a huge difference, I think. I'm actually kind of intrigued. It's a very sort of lower level change, and he's only playing on the third pair right now, but I'm kind of intrigued by Carson Soucy. Like, here's a guy that missed the first few games of the year because of injury. He's come in, and like, I think he's having a bit of a stabilizing influence. He's playing with Tyler Myers. Like, that's a third pairing. That's a third pairing now. Tyler Myers is only playing 13 minutes the last couple of games. We're talking about him a lot less. The challenge now is, how does that progress? How does that shift forward? Ian Cole, I was kind of excited about. I think Ian Cole's had some moments, but I think he's also struggled a little bit. Maybe that's some of it just adapting to where he's at on the roster and all that kind of thing. But like, he's an interesting player. Could he I think is still going to be more than he's been. That's something that is a sign that, okay, maybe things are going to go forward. At the end of the day, like I said, the signs are promising. Things are good. I think players have an understanding. I was thinking of it when you were talking about the coaching thing too, like the standard. Every coach sets a standard out for their player. Every coach has a different understanding of that. You think about, as you said, Manchester United. Here's a team that spent all this money, but for what purpose? What are the standards they're putting on their player? What are the expectations they're putting on their player? Is it just, oh, hey, CR7's back, let's just put him on the field, things are going to be fine? Like, that's clearly not a solution to your problem. You need to understand, what do we do? What are we doing in the ice? What are we looking for? How do players, what are you asking the players to assess themselves against? Like, that is a challenge. I don't think that was something in Bruce Boudreau's wheelhouse. That's not the kind of coach he was. I think Travis Green was trying to figure that out. I don't think he had as good. 2019-20, maybe the squad was good, but generally Travis Green didn't have as good of a squad as Rick Tocchet's working with. So, it's still a playoff sort of bubble team. Like, this is not a team that's, I don't think anyone's ready to declare saying, hey, they're a Stanley Cup contender. I think they're still a long way off. I think they do need to find another winger. I think they need to change up their mix of the bottom six. I think they need to find another defenseman. They're still a couple players away from being in that kind of discussion, but they're not, if this trends, they're not that far off, but also then how long can you sustain that? But anyway, this season, like I said, the things are promising. There's reason to think that this might actually be this may be the most interesting team we've seen in 4 or 5 years anyway.
Yeah, you just quickly, you raise a great point there. I know this market has been in love with tanking, and certainly Connor Bedard would spark a lot of that conversation, because who wouldn't want a player like that? But if you look at recent examples in history of teams that have won the Stanley Cup, they're not littered. You have to go back to Chicago to talk about a team that stockpiled really high picks.
Yeah.
Yes, Vegas was an expansion team, but Vegas's Stanley Cup, and certainly their strong start this year, is not born on the shoulders of high draft picks. It's in good roster construction.
Yes.
You look at Tampa, right? Tampa didn't go through that Vinny LeCavalier period or Steve Stamkos before. I mean, sure, they had a lot of talent on the teams that won cups, but they were not built off getting top 5 picks multiple years in a row. So
Yeah.
while we all would love to see the superstar player come in, certainly didn't work for the Oilers yet, at least. So I'm very intrigued about this idea and how you do construct a winner. Because we have been in love with draft picks in this market, and there are other ways to do it.
Well, and as I think I wrote a story about this last year, but it's not just about draft picks. It's what you do with them. You know, do you develop the players? Like, and the Canucks were not very good at that for a long time. They look like them. You look at that roster in Abbotsford right now. That's a lot of young players, a lot of guys on sort of early career contracts, a lot of interest. I mean, most of those guys aren't going to make it, right? Like, that's the reality. But it's an interesting group of players, and there's a reason why Vasily. Just to go back to the original, there's a reason why Vasily Podkolzin was sent there. Why they think that's the right place for him right now. That this is something they're trying. That the Tampa Lightning, their story is a development story. But you look at the Blues, their Stanley Cup. I mean, that was a smartly constructed team. That was a team that had some really top end, high quality two-way, Ryan O'Reilly type players. Braden Shen, Robert Thomas, like all these guys coming. Like Robert Thomas was a young player on that team, but these really high quality kind of do everything kind of players, and that's obviously you need your superstars, you need your guys who are going to lead the way. But the way the game has evolved over the last 10 years, it's about finding players who can essentially do it all. They're not necessarily going to be superstar scorers, but they're going to limit their mistakes. They're going to be smart decisions with the puck. They're going to force the play up the ice. They're going to play with tempo, and that literally is the kind of player that Rick Tocchet is looking for his team.
Great stuff, Patrick. We finish up like we always do. 4 games, and then we're recording this on Thursday. 4 games in the next 7 days, including the rare Friday, Saturday night back-to-back at home. What do you expect for the Canucks out of these next 4 games?
Well, I've already predicted a 4-1 win against the Blues, so I have to stick with that one. I think they win tomorrow. I think the Rangers game on Saturday is going to be a tough one. I mean, the Rangers are always such a tough. Last decade, they've been sort of quietly one of the really strong teams. Obviously, they've made the Stanley Cup final, but they haven't won. I think that's going to be a tough matchup, just coming up back to back, a little bit of the energy. So I bet they lose that one. Predators in on Tuesday, given how they played, I think that's a win. And then they go to the Sharks. Like, could they win 3 out of 4 here? Like, that seems like a big bet. One of these games is probably not going to go as expected. But I'm going to say, you know what? If we're going for it, I mean, between now and Thursday, I mean, we'll probably talk again next Thursday as we usually do. But I think of the next 4 games, I'm going to say 3 wins. There should be 3 wins. I mean, that should what the kind of standard that you're looking to set about this team now. So 3 wins out of 4. Let's do it.
And it feels like forever since we've been able to say that, right? Well, I agree with you. I think that's realistic. And I even think, Rangers coming to the West Coast, playing a later game, like, you have to take advantage of these things. You always talk about when it goes the other way, when they're heavy on travel. So who knows? Maybe it's 4 out of 4. Patrick, fascinating stuff. As always, great conversation today. As usual, you can, come back every week, listen to these videos with Patrick. Send him your questions. Find him either on Twitter or, on his stories. We want your comments.
Blue Sky.
We want more feedback from our readers. Absolutely. Yeah, go on, Blue Sky. So yes, these Canucks This Week videos brought to you by Paragon Roofing, paragonroofingbc.ca. For all your roofing needs, they will keep you warm, dry, just like it is at Rogers, where we get to see the Canucks. Thanks, Patrick. We will talk next week. Well, you and I will talk before that, but just for these purposes, people can talk to us next week.